Caitlin Clark walks into Chase Center tonight carrying something most athletes never get close to. Not a trophy, not a contract, not a headline. A number. 3. 3 assists separate her from a record Sue Bird has held since 2004. 22 years. A milestone that has sat untouched through every era this league has produced, through every point guard who came through this league thinking she might be the one to move it. None of them did. And tonight, on a road floor in San Francisco, in front of a crowd that didn't come to cheer for her, Caitlin Clark has a real shot at doing what none of them could. The math is almost insulting in how clean it is. Sue Bird needed 82 games to reach 1,000 points and 500 assists. 82 games, a number that felt untouchable for 2 decades. A pace that defined what elite looked like at the point guard position in this league for an entire generation. Caitlin Clark is going to walk onto that floor tonight in her 59th game. Her 59th! She has played 23 fewer games than Bird needed, and she is 3 assists away from standing above her on a list every point guard in WNBA history has measured herself against. That is not a hot streak. That is not a good month. That is a player operating at a level this league has genuinely never seen before, producing at a pace that doesn't have a historical comparison because the history hasn't existed until right now. And the front office that runs her team has spent the last 6 days saying absolutely nothing about any of it. Not a post, not a quote, not a single sentence from the organization whose franchise exists in its current form entirely because of the player who is 3 assists from history tonight. The Indiana Fever have had 6 days to build toward this moment, 6 days to put their institutional voice behind their star on a national stage, 6 days to do the thing that every competent sports organization does when one of its players is about to make history. They have done none of it. The silence isn't just strange. It isn't just a missed opportunity. It is a specific, documented 6-day decision to say nothing while the story told itself around them without their name on it. Tip-off is at 10 p.m. Eastern. The moment is real. The record is there. And the question that hangs over Chase Center tonight isn't just whether Caitlin Clark gets 3 assists. The question is what it means that the people being paid to run her franchise made a choice to be absent from the biggest week of her young career. 6 days ago, the math became public. Friday night, Caitlin Clark walked off the floor at Gainbridge Fieldhouse after one of the cleanest performances of her career. 22 points, 9 assists. A Fever win against the Golden State Valkyries that didn't feel like a milestone game when ended, but became one the moment the stat trackers updated the career totals. By Saturday morning, every outlet covering this league had it. Pro Football Network had the numbers, the Indianapolis beat writers had the numbers, every career stat tracker with a WNBA feed had published the projection before noon. 6 assists from tying Sue Bird, 3 more after that to pass her. Indiana's next road game was in San Francisco, Chase Center, the same building, the same floor, the same crowd. The game was always going to be national television. The moment was always going to be enormous. And the Indiana Fever front office knew all of it by Saturday morning. That is not speculation. That is math. Their analytics staff, their communications department, their basketball operations team, every single person in that building whose job touches the product on the floor knew what was sitting 6 assists away from their franchise player by the time the weekend was over. They had the projection, they had the timeline. They had 6 full days to decide what they wanted to say about it and how they wanted to say it. 6 days is a long time in a news cycle built around a player who generates the kind of attention Caitlin Clark generates. 6 days is enough time to draft a statement, to schedule a press conference, to put a quote in a reporter's hands, to do literally anything that signals to the world that the organization running this team understands what is about to happen on its watch. They used all 6 days to do nothing. No post from the official Fever social accounts framing the milestone, no quote from anyone in basketball operations about what Clark breaking Bird's record would mean for the franchise, no media day setup, no feature video, no digital content building toward the moment. The Indiana Fever, as an institution, spent an entire week watching the story of their players' historic pace grow louder and louder in every corner of the sports internet, and chose to remain completely absent from it. The head coach spoke, the general manager spoke, the president of basketball and business operations didn't make a single public statement about any of it, not one word. 6 days of silence from the woman whose name is on every major decision this franchise has made since September of 2024. There are fans who bought tickets to a road game in San Francisco specifically to watch Caitlin Clark play. Not Fever fans in the traditional sense, not people from Indianapolis who follow this team through the full calendar. People who bought tickets to a road game in a city where their team isn't playing because Caitlin Clark is walking onto that floor and they wanted to be there when she did something historic. Those fans exist tonight inside Chase Center. They traveled, they spent money, they showed up for a moment that the organization running Clark's career has spent a week actively ignoring. That's not nothing. That's the kind of fan behavior that builds franchise value, that expands markets, that turns a regional team into a national brand. And the organization those fans are essentially subsidizing has spent 6 days being smaller than the moment they created.
There is a name on the door at the Indiana Fever offices. It isn't Stephanie White's. It isn't Amber Cox's. It isn't even Herb Simon's, though his family owns the team. The name that matters in terms of daily operational decisions, in terms of who built this current version of the organization, in terms of who is responsible for the direction this franchise has taken since the offseason before the 2025 season, is Kelly Krauskopf. Kelly Krauskopf is the president of basketball and business operations for the Indiana Fever. She returned to the franchise in September of 2024 after spending years inside the Indianapolis Pacers front office as their assistant general manager. She came back to a franchise that had just drafted Caitlin Clark and was beginning to understand in real time what that meant. When she arrived, she didn't come back quietly. She stood at a press conference and told Indianapolis that she was back to set a new standard for women's sports. Those were not casual words. That was a statement of intent delivered publicly to a city and a fan base that was watching the Fever's profile explode in ways nobody had fully predicted yet. She came in with credibility, with a track record in this market, and with a specific vision for what the franchise was supposed to become. And in the months that followed, she moved quickly. On October 2nd of 2024, she hired Amber Cox as general manager. 4 weeks after that, on November 1st, she hired Stephanie White as head coach. Both moves were hers. Both press conferences carried her fingerprints. Both hires were presented publicly as the foundation of a rebuilt organization. Her name was on the press release when Indianapolis announced the $78 million performance center scheduled to open before the 2027 season. Her name was on the organizational messaging when the Fever talked about building a program that could sustain success beyond any individual player's presence. She has been the face of the organizational voice in every context that mattered, on every decision that carried weight, in every public moment where the Indiana Fever needed someone to speak with authority. And her name has not been on a single public word about Caitlin Clark this week. Not one statement, not one quote, not one single sentence from the woman who returned to Indianapolis specifically to build the kind of organization that could support what Caitlin Clark was becoming. The player who was the entire reason the $78 million performance center exists in the conversation is 3 assists from history tonight. And the president of the franchise that benefits from every dollar her presence generates has chosen, deliberately and specifically, to let that week pass without saying anything. That is a choice. Every day of silence is a choice. Every day that passes without a statement, without a quote, without a single organizational sentence about a franchise player approaching a historic milestone is a day where someone in that building decided that speaking wasn't worth doing. 6 days of that kind of choosing adds up to something. It adds up to a posture. It adds up to a message, even if the message is silence. The silence might have been easier to understand if the week had been quiet. It wasn't. It was one of the loudest weeks in Caitlin Clark's professional career, and not entirely for good reasons. Friday night's game at Chase Center didn't end cleanly. After the final buzzer, Tiffany Hayes, a 13-year WNBA veteran playing for the Golden State Valkyries, walked to the post-game podium and said something that traveled immediately. She told the cameras, on record, that the officials would never start calling the fouls on Caitlin Clark, that if they did, Clark would never get to play the game. The clip ran on every major sports outlet within hours. It was the kind of quote that doesn't stay local. It doesn't stay in the WNBA conversation. It bleeds into the wider sports internet, and it picks up velocity because the name attached to it is the most searched name in women's basketball. Kelly Krauskopf said nothing.
Saturday and Sunday, the story didn't shrink. It grew. Outkick ran a report. AOL syndication ran a version. Regional affiliates picked it up. The reporting characterized some of the social media content Hayes had engaged with as containing language resembling calls for physical harm directed at Clark. That framing ran for 48 hours across multiple platforms. Whether every characterization in those reports was precise or whether some of it was amplified in ways that outran the facts, the core story was real. A veteran player had made a public statement about officiating on camera, it had been widely reported, and the player that statement was directed at was about to walk onto Hayes' home floor in a nationally televised game. Kelly Krauskopf said nothing. Kelly Krauskopf's head coach, Tiffany White, who Krauskopf hired in November of 2024, handled it the way coaches handle it. She stood at her own podium after the Friday win and defended her star on camera. She was direct and she was clear. She said Clark was an emotional player and that it was one of the things that made her great. That's a head coach doing her job. That's the person who is paid to be in the room with Clark every day, standing in front of cameras and putting a public voice behind her player. It was the right thing to do, and White did it. The head coach spoke. Tuesday came, and the league office in New York had issued no public statement on Hayes. The WNBA Players Association had issued no public statement on Hayes. No discipline announced, no fine made public, no suspension, no formal review mentioned in any league communication. The week passed through its middle stretch with no institutional response from the organizations designed to govern the product and protect the players inside it. Kelly Krauskopf said nothing. Wednesday brought a regularly scheduled media availability. Amber Cox, the general manager Krauskopf hired in October of 2024, was in front of cameras. This is the same Amber Cox who had stood at a podium in April and told reporters that the Fever's decisions were impacting what they needed to do against the hard cap going forward. Cox had built her public profile around the team's financial and roster reality. The entire reason the cap matters, the way Cox described it matters, is because of the player whose milestone was sitting 6 days away. Cox was in front of cameras on Wednesday. She had a chance. She could have added an organizational voice to the week's narrative. She could have put the front office's name on something public and protective. Kelly Krauskopf said nothing. 6 days. The head coach spoke. The general manager spoke. The woman whose name is actually on the door of the organization, the woman who set the standard, the woman who made the hires that shaped this team's public face, has not made one public statement in 6 days about the most important week of her franchise players' season. That isn't a coincidence. That isn't a scheduling conflict. That is a sustained, deliberate absence that lasted the entire week and now runs directly into a nationally televised road game where the story it created gets to write itself without Indiana's name on it. Tonight, Caitlin Clark walks back into the same building where all of this started, Chase Center, the home arena of Tiffany Hayes, who 4 nights ago told the cameras the fouls would never get called on Clark, and who tonight takes the floor having received no public discipline from the league, no suspension, no fine that has been announced anywhere, no statement from the commissioner's office about what she said or what was reported about her social media activity. None of that exists in the public record. What exists in the public record is a veteran player who made a pointed comment on officiating on a national broadcast,
played out the rest of that week without consequence, and is now on the floor in the same gym where Caitlin Clark needs 3 assists to pass Sue Bird. The Indiana Fever front office has not asked publicly for a league review. They have not issued a statement of support for their player. They have not made one protective public beat for the player whose jersey leads merchandise sales across the entire league. The player who moved the needle on franchise valuations, television ratings, attendance figures, and the national conversation around women's basketball in ways that no single athlete had moved them in this league's history, is walking into a hostile road environment tonight. And the organization that employs her spent the entire lead-up being entirely absent from the moment. That absence is felt by a specific kind of person tonight. There are fans inside Chase Center who are there because of Caitlin Clark, not because of Golden State, not because of the Valkyrie season, because of Clark. They bought tickets when the schedule dropped, or when the record math went public, or when they realized this was the game. They are wearing her jersey. They are in a building where she is the away player, where the crowd around them is rooting for the other team, where the player who questioned whether she'd ever get a fair whistle is warming up on the home sideline. And the organization that put Caitlin Clark in that jersey has given those fans absolutely nothing this week. No organizational voice, no public statement, no messaging that says the Fever understand what this moment is and is present for it. Those fans are carrying the moment for the franchise tonight because the franchise chose not to carry it for itself. There is a word for organizations that let their stars absorb all the weight of big moments without institutional support. There are several words, actually. None of them are flattering, and none of them apply to what Kelly Krauskopf said she came back to Indianapolis to build.
There is a number Kelly Krauskopf knows. She knows it precisely. She knows it the way every executive in sports knows their franchise valuation number, because it is the single clearest measurement of whether the work they are doing is translating into real-world value. The number is $560 million. That is what Sportico reported the Indiana Fever franchise is worth as of May 2026. $560 million. That number represents a 522% increase in franchise value since Caitlin Clark arrived. Read that again slowly. 522%. That is not normal franchise appreciation. That is not what happens when an organization makes smart hires and builds a solid product over several years and gradually earns its way to a higher valuation. Normal franchise appreciation in professional sports looks nothing like 522%. Normal franchise appreciation is single digits annually if you are doing well. What happened to the Indiana Fever is not a market correction. It is not the WNBA rising on a general tide. It is not the result of the Performance Center announcement, or the new coaching hire, or the improved practice facilities, or any of the organizational infrastructure decisions Kelly Krauskopf has made since returning. All of those things matter. None of them account for 522%. Every dollar of that growth has Caitlin Clark's name on it. That is not an attack on Kelly Krauskopf's work, or Amber Cox's work, or Tiffany White's coaching, or the players on the roster who have built a competitive team around Clark. All of those things are real, but the valuation didn't move the way it moved because of any of them. The Indiana Fever went from a franchise that existed at a certain market value to a franchise worth over $500 million because they drafted the player who rewrote what the WNBA could mean to a national audience. One player, one draft pick, 522%. Krauskopf came back to Indiana in September of 2024. She walked into a building where that rewriting was already in progress. She inherited a situation where the most important organizational decision had already been made before she returned, the decision to draft Clark first overall in 2024. And her job from that point forward was to build the organization around what that decision had created. She has done parts of that well. The hires are credible. The Performance Center is real.
The long-term infrastructure investment signals that the ownership group understands the window. But infrastructure investments and coaching hires don't protect franchise value. The player who generates the franchise value protects it. And right now, that player is 3 assists from a historic milestone, walking into a hostile road building with a veteran opponent on the floor who was on camera last week questioning whether she'd ever get fair officiating, and the woman whose $560 million exists because of Clark has not said one public word about it in 6 days. Every dollar of the growth, 0 of the protection. That math is almost harder to look at than the Sue Bird record math, because the Sue Bird record math is about greatness. The franchise value math is about accountability, and accountability is supposed to be the thing organizational leaders are for. Here is what makes the silence this week specifically hard to excuse. Kelly Krauskopf has done this before. Not something like this, not a comparable situation that roughly resembles the current one. This, the exact thing this week called for. She has done it, she did it well, and the record of her doing it is documented and public and sitting in the Indiana Fever's own organizational history. The year is 2015. Tamika Catchings is the best player in Indiana Fever history at the time. She is in the back end of a 15-year Hall of Fame career, and her body is paying for every minute of it. She has been through knee surgeries. She has been through the physical accumulation of a decade and a half of professional basketball at the highest level. She is still performing, she is still producing, but the mileage is real, and anyone watching closely can see it. The question for the organization isn't whether Catchings is great. The question is how you protect a great player through the final stage of her career without burning her out, without letting pride and stubbornness turn what should be a graceful ending into something harder. The Fever front office had an answer. They didn't let her play through it and pretend everything was fine. They built a hard management protocol around her. They controlled her minutes deliberately. They held her out of back-to-back games when the schedule demanded it. They communicated publicly about what they were doing and why. They didn't hide the protocol behind closed doors and leave reporters to speculate about why Catchings wasn't playing full minutes in certain situations. They told Indianapolis exactly what the plan was. They framed it respectfully, in a way that honored Catchings while being honest about the reality. They protected the body and the narrative simultaneously because they understood that if they didn't control the narrative, someone else would control it for them, and it would not be flattering.
The president of the Indiana Fever in 2015 was Kelly Krauskopf. She wrote the protocol. She put it in place. She stood in front of microphones and explained it. She made the proactive public statement that gave the organization's position before the questions forced a defensive one. She understood in 2015 that protecting a franchise player means more than making good roster decisions and hiring good coaches. It means being present in the public space around your player. It means making sure that when something is happening that involves your star, your organizational voice is in the conversation early and clearly enough that nobody can write a version of the story that leaves you out of it entirely. She knows this. That is not a theory about what she might understand if she thought about it carefully. She has demonstrated with receipts in a documented public situation that she understands exactly what proactive franchise player protection looks like and how to execute it. She did it for Tamika Catchings in 2015. The playbook exists. She wrote it. In 2026, on the week her current star is being talked about on a national broadcast by a 13-year veteran who questioned whether she'd ever get fair officiating. On the week that same star is walking into a hostile road game, 3 assists from passing Sue Bird. On the week that every major sports outlet in the country has had Caitlin Clark's name in a headline at least once. The woman who wrote the protection protocol in 2015 has executed none of it. No public protective statement, no narrative control, no management protocol announcement.
No microphone, no explanation, no organizational presence in the most important week of her franchise player's season. The receipt isn't what she did wrong this week. The receipt is what she has done before and is choosing not to do now. She is the woman who wrote the protocol. She is the woman who knows what it looks like when an organization shows up for its star and what it costs when it doesn't. She watched the 2015 version of this situation play out well because she was the one running it. And the version of her that exists in 2026, running a franchise worth 10 times what it was worth when she last sat in this chair, is choosing silence. That gap between the 2015 Kelly Krauskopf and the 2026 version is the story of this week as much as the record is. Tonight, at Chase Center, there are 3 versions of how this ends. They are not equally likely. They are not equally comfortable to think about from Indianapolis, but they are the real possibilities, and each of them says something specific about what the Fever's 6 days of silence actually cost. The first version is the one everyone connected to the Fever should want. Caitlin Clark walks onto that floor and does what she has been doing since the day she arrived in this league. She reads the defense, she finds her teammates, she dishes 3 assists at some point in the course of 40 minutes against a team that has seen her play once already this week. The crowd reacts, the moment happens, and the Indiana Fever, from their offices in Indianapolis, publish a celebration tweet or a graphic or a brief statement about their franchise player making history. They get to participate in the milestone they spent a week ignoring the lead-up to. Every other voice in basketball, national media, former players, rival front offices, the NBWA itself, has already weighed in, and Indiana gets to clap from the back of the room after everyone else got there first. The record gets broken. The celebration is real. The organizational absence from the week that built toward it is also real. The second version is quieter and, in a strange way, easier for the front office. Clark doesn't get there tonight. She picks up 4 assists. She picks up 2. The Valkyries, playing at home, collapse her driving lanes on every possession that matters. The officials swallow the whistle the way they have been swallowing it in situations that involved her this season. The record slides 1 game down the schedule, and the Indiana Fever front office, which has said nothing for a week, gets to keep saying nothing. The story moves to the next game, the next city, the next opportunity. The silence continues without ever being confronted by the moment the silence was supposed to be about. That version feels almost like a relief for people who have been hoping the conversation about their organizational absence just goes away. It doesn't go away. It goes to the next game. The third version is the one nobody in Indianapolis wants to think about, which is the one that the silence this week makes more possible, not less. Tiffany Hayes is on the floor tonight. She was on the floor last Friday when Caitlin Clark picked up 5 personal fouls, plus a flagrant, plus a technical, while Hayes, who finished the same game with 3 personal fouls, walked off without comparable consequences. That foul disparity, 5 plus 2 for Clark against 3 for Hayes in the same game, is the kind of number that doesn't get dismissed in a league where officiating consistency is already a conversation. Tonight, Hayes is back. No discipline issued publicly, no statement from the commissioner about what was said on that podium last Friday. The situation going into tonight's game is functionally identical to the situation that produced last Friday's result. And if Hayes makes contact the way she said on camera that she wouldn't, the night becomes something else entirely. Not a record night, not a milestone, something else. And the Indiana Fever front office, the one with Kelly Krauskopf's name on the door, gets to respond to it from a city they're not in, days after the moment passed, with no institutional voice already in place to shape what the response means. That third version is what proactive organizational protection is designed to prevent. That is why front offices speak before the crisis instead of after it. That is why the protocol Kelly Krauskopf built in 2015 was built before Ketching's body gave out,
not after. Reactive protection is not protection. It's damage control. And damage control from a distance in a city you're not in, on a night where your franchise player is already on the floor with no institutional armor, is the worst possible version of a conversation you were always going to have anyway.
3 assists, 22 years, $560 million of franchise value, walking into Chase Center in a jersey that belongs to Caitlin Clark. And the organization whose name is supposed to be on that jersey has spent 6 days deciding that their voice wasn't needed. Tip-off is in hours, not days, not nights, hours. By the time most people read this, Clark will already be warming up. The layup lines will be running. The building will be filling. Whatever Tiffany Hayes said on Friday, and whatever the social media reports said over the weekend, and whatever the league's non-response to all of it communicated about its priorities, none of that goes back into the bottle now. It is the environment tonight. It is the context Clark walks into. It is the reality the Indiana Fever created through 6 days of not helping shape it differently. Kelly Krauskopf has been in professional sports long enough to know that organizations are judged not just by their wins and losses, but by what they stand for in the moments that matter outside the box score. She returned to Indianapolis in 2024, saying she was there to set a new standard for women's sports. Standards are not set in the quiet weeks when everything is going well and nothing is being tested. They are set in weeks exactly like this one, when a player franchise is under a specific kind of pressure, approaching a specific kind of history in a specific environment that the organization has the power to say something meaningful about. She has a few hours left. The options are still technically available. A statement still lands differently before tip-off than it does after. A public word from the president of basketball operations about what 3 assists tonight would mean for this franchise, for Caitlin Clark's place in this league's history, for the fans who are in that building tonight because they believe in what she is building, would still mean something. It would mean less than it would have meant on Saturday morning when the math went public. It would mean less than it would have meant Monday when the story about Hayes was running everywhere. It would mean less than it would have meant Wednesday's media availability when Cox was in front of cameras and Krauskopf could have been standing next to her. Every day of silence costs something. That cost doesn't disappear with a statement in the final hours. But a statement in the final hours is still better than what happens if the clock runs out and Krauskopf has nothing. Because then the record either happens or it doesn't, and either way, the Indiana Fever have built their institutional identity for this week entirely in the negative space of what they didn't say. The $560 million franchise, the president who wrote the player protection protocol, the week Caitlin Clark was 3 assists from history, and the organization running her team decided that silence was the right posture. That is a story that gets told in basketball circles for a long time. It gets told every time Clark does something historic going forward, every time the record math matters again, every time somebody is writing about what she built and who was there for it and who let the moment pass without putting their name on it. The Fever front office has spent 6 days being smaller than its star. Tonight, there's still a few hours left to decide whether that's how this week is remembered. 3 assists, 22 years, 1 hostile road floor, 1 franchise player in a visiting jersey, and a president of basketball operations with a phone, a microphone, and roughly the same amount of time it takes to warm up for a road game to decide what kind of leader she actually is. The clock is running.